Hey everyone, and welcome back to Debate. This is the video for week 4, and there are a few different things we're going to do today. I want to start out by just going over to the schedule for our class to remind everyone of what's coming up and what's due this week. So, what you'll see here, we're going to discuss credibility, ethics, fallacies, and spin in terms of debate. And also at the end of week 4, you see that correspondence debate 1 is due. And so that's assignment number 5. Let's go down and make sure we're all on the same page here. This debate will be old school before we could travel and use telecommunications. People would write letters and publish arguments, and then other people would respond to those. So, what I've done is write 3 different arguments on different topics, and you will choose one of those and you'll respond to that. Now, for this one, just use your sort of natural debate knowledge, your natural argumentation, and everything that we've learned so far. Try to go ahead and marry those two elements together, and that will help us build as we get closer to a more formal debate. So, tell me why I'm wrong, why my argument's wrong. Really try to do that in a meaningful way. Tell me what is weak about the argument. Maybe give me counterpoints to each item or as many as you can. You can propose a different argument, sort of an alternative, if you will. And you can find all of that on the Blackboard page. So let me jump in here and go to our site. Go to 303. If you go to the course documents, that's where you're going to find this. So go down to week 4. Move this up a little. And this is a fallacies PowerPoint. This will go along with today's lecture. But actually, if you go to the discussions, you will see correspondence debate 1. And there are right now there's 3 posts. So if I go in here, these are the 3 topics. Cereal is soup. Monogamy is unrealistic, and Santa Claus is evil. So, whichever one of those seems to be most interesting to you, go for it. You can go by the titles, or you can come into each one, and here is where you will see my argument. So, that'll be available for each one. Now, what you're going to do is simply reply on this thread and write your counter argument. Okay, so that's the assignment. There is no length requirement or limitation for this one, but I do want you to be as thorough as needed, right? What I say is do it in a meaningful way, and that looks different for different people. So I can't say it's got to be this many words or not, but just make sure that it addresses the argument fully. If there's something in here you agree with, you could say, you know what, actually I do agree with that. But here's why I think overall you're wrong. Whatever you need to do for this one, go for it. The objective here is to get you thinking about ideas in a different way and to see multiple sides of an issue. Most of us probably don't think Santa Claus is evil. Most of us probably don't think that monogamy is unrealistic because marriage is so normal in our culture. And most people probably don't think cereal is soup. Now you may, and if that's the case, you'll have to play devil's advocate on those a little bit. But give it your best shot, and then have that in by the end of week 4. And of course, I'll turn it around and give you feedback as quickly as possible. And that will actually lead into the next couple assignments. So here, just so you've got a heads up, there's a presidential debate on the 29th. You're going to write a reaction to that. We'll talk about that next time, or you can read it in the syllabus. And then I will write a response to you specifically for the correspondence debate. And then you're going to respond again in week 6, and you'll use Monroe's motivated sequence. Again, I will talk to you about that before it's time. We don't want to jump too far ahead. For today, let's shrink this and go to the course pack. Whoops. Here we go. We are going to be starting on page 11. This is chapter 8. with credibility, ethics, fallacies, and spin. So most of these words you're familiar with. I imagine all of them you're familiar with, but I want to make sure that we're talking about them in the same sort of way, so that we're on the same page here. First off, credibility is trustworthiness of an individual or of an argument. The big thing that you need to realize is that your credibility as a speaker can be either lost or gained, weakened or strengthened before you ever start speaking, while you're speaking, or even after you're speaking. So if you think about source credibility, that's the general idea of you being believable or trustworthy. The next idea there is sort of this initial credibility. This is before you ever speak. You see credibility gained or lost based on credentials, education, background, mannerisms, reputation. So if you are giving a presentation or an argument, making an argument, and it's about something very specialized, let's say it's a medical topic, and you are introduced as a financial expert, that can definitely hurt your credibility. Case in point, just yesterday, there was a press conference from Grand Valley dealing with the new lockdown and COVID. So the people that were talking from Grand Valley, representing the school and explaining the situation, were the president, which makes sense, and the vice president of finance. Now, to me, that just seems strange, and I know it did to others as well, that there wasn't anyone with medical expertise on the call, on the press conference. And so just knowing that background did not help the credibility of those two speakers. So that could really take away from your credibility before you ever start to speak if we know that this isn't really your area of expertise. It could also be other things. You can see it on there, like mannerisms. So if you come up and you look extremely nervous, which again, nervous is normal, but if that sort of drowns out to your audience your argument, they just keep being distracted by how nervous you are, that can take away from your credibility as well. Now, when you start to speak and you make the actual argument itself, that is when you either gain or lose what's known as derived credibility. That's all based on the quality of the argument. Now, stick with me on this. It's nice to think that we can segment, before, during, and after an argument is made and judge each one uniquely. But that's not the way life works. So if you come in and you have hurt your credibility without really starting to speak at all, maybe it was a mannerism, or it's because we know you're not an expert, super familiar with the field, it's more difficult for an audience to really stay with you during the argument formation itself and then try to say, well, they're not an expert, but this makes sense. Unless you too are an expert, you can't know for certain if it makes sense. So that's another big reason that we only do sort of these common person arguments here where we're not using sources. Because otherwise you would need to cite experts to know that you were speaking the truth, right? So you could show us that people agreed with you. For our purposes, you want to make sure that your argument would make sense to the common person. Is it logical? Does one thing naturally lead to the other? So it's got some sort of a sequential quality to it. Is it delivered in a clear way that is not taxing to the audience? In other words, they don't have to do extra mental work to keep up with you. You're taking them through it very clearly, slowly, and deliberately, so that it's flowing in the way that you intend it to. Now, also, one thing to consider that's not on your pack here, but it's terminal credibility. And this is that credibility that's gained or lost after you're finished speaking. So the classic example is giving a why you should quit smoking speech or argument, and then walking out and seeing the person light up a cigarette. That just doesn't make much sense. Or if they're talking about anti-sweatshops while they're wearing a brand that clearly makes their clothes in a sweatshop, that's not going to work well either. So really, for us, the things I want you to focus on for credibility is that you need to be as trustworthy as possible. And you can see the ideas that are written down here, and that helps you if you are able to mention relevant expertise or education. I know we're not experts in these areas, but you could talk about for the three correspondence debates, for example, that you are in a relationship or people who have been in long-term monogamous relationships, that you have experienced Santa Claus in some way, and this is your opinion based on that, or that you are a frequent consumer of cereal and or soup, and that at least you're familiar with the topic. It doesn't mean that you need to be an expert. It just means that you need to have some connection to that topic. The next one here is use quality, non-biased sources if using sources, but we're not, so you can take that one out. Then the third one is to present a clear argument with sound reasoning and no fallacies. I told you that it needs to be logical and make sense without too much extra work on the part of the audience. We'll cover fallacies in just a moment. And then last but not least, with credibility, be consistent. So important. And I want to talk about this just briefly in two ways. On one hand, be consistent within an argument in terms of what you say, the way you pronounce things, even all the way to making a an argument that argues for the exact same thing time and again. So, in other words, you wouldn't want to say for the Santa Claus is evil if you were arguing against that. You say Santa Claus is not evil because um, this is a holiday that we all celebrate and children love Santa Claus. Then you might say later, children really don't know much about this. So as adults, we have to make sure we understand that Santa Claus isn't an evil figure. Wait, you just said that he was okay because children love him, but then you just told us that children don't know much because they're too young to make these decisions. There's a couple other problems with those two arguments as examples, but for this example, for consistency, make sure that it's not only consistent within the argument, but that it's logically consistent. Again, if children can't understand one thing because they're not mature enough, how can they understand another? And if that's the case, that is possible for them, you'll want to explicitly tell us that and why that argument is consistent. Because if your audience sees holes that might be in your argument or these inconsistencies, they can get hung up on them. They don't move forward with you as you develop further in the argument, and they're still back at that spot wondering, wait, does that make sense to me? And that's what you really want to be careful with. Okay, so that's your credibility. Do we trust you? Hopefully we will. Make sure that you're at least considering ways that you can be more trustworthy. The second element here is ethics, and you see those listed. You've got ethics as a moral understanding or principle in life. It's sort of the way that we see enduring good, bad, right, wrong, that sort of thing. But for our purposes in the class, it's a code for the debate. Things like we don't want to lie knowingly. We don't want to use fallacies knowingly. Again, more on that soon. And we don't want to, set out to sort of fool people or twist information in a deliberate way that takes away from its accuracy or its intended meaning. So with this one, we can look at ethics in a few different ways. The classical notion is Aristotelian ethics, which basically just says don't have controversial starting points. In other words, don't twist definitions. So if we were doing parliamentary debate later, we would use resolutions which sound like something like this house believes we should cancel school. And for most of us, a common definition of that would mean, or common understanding would mean that we're going to literally stop holding classes at a university or another learning institution, right? This house would cancel school. You have some room to wiggle and play with that. So other folks might say cancel really means that we're going to do away with, and school means basic training for the military. So this house would do away with basic training for the military. And they want to get a little creative and a little elaborate, maybe take it way too far. Aristotle would tell us don't do that, that you're not going to accomplish anything with that in terms of the actual topic. So when you see your options for Santa Claus, monogamy, in human relationships, and then cereal and soup, make sure that you're taking it at face value. All right, so don't try to go out on a limb and really be super creative or adventurous with definitions. The next item is that you need to think about some moral virtue of an argument. So, in other words, it's sort of like doctors take an oath to do no harm, right? And we want to do that with debate as well. And we do that through being fair to other people. This doesn't mean that, you have to be super friendly or you have to concede a point or you have to, go over the top to be welcoming. I mean, this is a debate after all. We don't want to be nasty, but we also want to win. I mean, so we want to prove our point. And in order to do no harm and be fair to others, there are some things to avoid. And you'll see these listed as well. This is the first one is called a truism. A truism is an argument that cannot be debated ethically. And while nothing's off limits, it's almost impossible to debate these things. Like if you look at the examples there, racism is bad. I'm sure there are some fine people on both sides, as some people would say, but there are folks out there who would make the argument that racism is not that bad. Most common people, sensible, logical, moral people, can't make that argument in the right mindset. It's just not going to happen in good taste. So if you want your opponent to argue that racism is okay, you've committed a truism. You're not being fair to your opponent. Similar, what if you said Barack Obama was the best Democratic president of the 2000s? Okay, well, yeah, he's the only Democratic president of the 2000s. So again, that's not debatable. Your opponent couldn't come back and say, no, actually it was, there is no one, right? So you can't argue that. Be careful with those things. They can seem like the gotcha, boy, I figured this out. There's no way they're gonna win. But again, if it's a non-starter, if it prevents a debate, a meaningful debate from happening, don't use that. All right, the next thing that you'll want to avoid is a need for specialized knowledge. And so, that's what we're doing with this common person argument focus. You might see an example like these. The military should retire the F-16 due to its low thrust to drag ratio. What? Someone in our audience may know exactly what that means, but most of us do not. And so, since we're not consulting sources, we don't need to go that direction, right? So stay away from these sorts of definitions of terms or types, topics of debate. Similarly, epistemological assumptions should consider axiological positions. I know what that means, but most people don't, and I wouldn't expect them to. And think about this not just in a debate realm of like a classroom or on a stage or in a competition, but think about this in like a day-to-day, you and some other person having a discussion, and you start breaking out these big terms and topics that they don't know about. Well, you know who that makes look bad? It's you. It doesn't make them look dumb because they don't know these advanced topics. It just makes you look like you're a know-it-all, we'll call it, that's just trying to one-up everybody. So we don't need to go that direction in our debates either. All right, next up, you see debate ethics. Some things to consider here is, first of all, fiat power must be present. Now, this is for a policy debate. And what fiat power means is that whoever you are, if you say something should make a change, the group or person that you're saying should make that change needs to actually have the power to do it. So if we were talking about Grand Valley should cancel all in-person courses for the rest of the semester, that would be fine. That's fiat power is there. Grand Valley has the power to cancel classes. But if you wanted to say something like the student senate should cancel the rest of the semester's in-person classes, they don't have that power. That's not a good position because the student senate doesn't have a say and if we cancel classes or not, at least not a deciding say. And you see the other ones here. GV will issue unicorns for all students. Well, where are they going to get those? The U.S. government will take the year off. What? How does that work? We can't do that. On this same note here with debate ethics, make sure that you're giving a real choice for the judge or the audience. Um, so with this one, like you see the example, you should never give money to a mugger. Okay, and what if the retort from the other side was, you know what, you actually should. What you shouldn't do though is give money to a robber. Well, that's just semantics at that point. What's the difference between a mugger and a robber? Maybe the mugger beats you and takes your money, where the robber only takes your money. I don't know, but it's not a real choice for the judges, for the audience, and for your opponents. Similar here. The best movie ever is The Godfather, or the best movie ever is the Godfather saga. You know, they did make one that strung all three of them together in a chronological way. And so some people would say, no, well, actually, that one's the best. I think we would all agree that if you're in either one of these camps, you're a big Godfather fan. So let's just focus on that instead of these finite, this one versus that one. It's not a real choice, again, for the audience or for your judges. Third item with debate ethics, don't lie or mislead your audience. Again, this is just a killer. False information, the use of stereotypes, and what we're about to talk about being fallacies. Listen, I've seen people lie during debates because they thought that it would give them an advantage. And chances are someone in that room is going to know that you're lying. Someone watching that debate, or in our case, for the first ones reading that debate, will know that what you're saying isn't true. All they need to do is speak up, right? So they could say something and they could respond in writing for something for us on the discussion threads. Say, actually, no, that's not right. That's wrong. So one student was trying to convince the other. Was okay. So it was a woman who was a student in class. This is back when the Gardasil vaccine came out that prevents HPV, and so the woman did not like the vaccine. I think she was just anti-vaccine overall, and her position was that you should not get this new vaccine. And one of the reasons she gave is that the injection has to be given in your vagina, right, in the super sensitive area. And that's just not the way it works. And so as soon as her speech was over, most of the women in the room raised their hand, and it was like, yeah, what's the question? Who is your doctor? They didn't accuse her of lying. They were actually concerned for her that her doctor may be doing something inappropriate, because they had already had the vaccine and that's not how it was administered to them. So again, it might seem in the moment like, boy, this would be helpful. I could just add this in. Don't do that knowingly. Don't do that. Don't rely on stereotypes either to make your argument. You might say things like, well, Grand Valley should close the in-person courses, but you know how those Midwesterners are. They just won't stop. Like, wait, what? They're all in a group now. God help us, please don't do it with anyone's race, ethnicity, religion, body shape, orientation, sexuality, you name it, right? Stay away from those things. It only makes you look bad as a debater. It gives off just the vibe of, I can't do this in a legitimate way, so I'm gonna take this low road and try to weasel my way through this, and it's not gonna work. Next, fallacies. You will want to stay away from fallacies during your debates, really during any time you're making an argument, whether it's this class or somewhere else. And you see a list of those here. What I'm going to point out to you is that on the Blackboard site, under the Week4 folder in Documents, you have this PowerPoint. Go ahead and watch this. If you just bring it up and then hit play from start, I've done a voiceover so that we'll walk through what each of these fallacies is, how we can identify it, why we should avoid it, and then examples for you. So do spend some time looking at that. This is not an exhaustive list of all the different logical fallacies that are in existence, but it does sort of hit what I've seen the most of. So in my opinion, these are the most common ones used in a debate, especially the style of debate we're going to use. So, just as a quick overview, an ad hominem is name calling. So, always go after an argument, not a person. A causal fallacy is when you say that one thing caused another to happen, but maybe it didn't, or at least it was only one of many factors. Bandwagon fallacy is like sports. You only like something because it's popular. An either or fallacy is like you act as though there's only two options when in reality there are many choices that could be made. A straw fallacy is when you treat the other argument as though it's just dumb or it's incomplete and you don't give it a fair representation in your rebuttal. A red herring fallacy is when you try to distract away from the point at hand. And the appeal to misplaced authority is when you give someone credit for being an expert in an area that they just aren't an expert in. And this could be, they could be an expert. So, for example, I'm an expert in communication. But if you said, well, Dr. Brown said this thing about science, so it must be right. I don't know much about biology and chemistry, right? So I'm not an expert in that field. And there'll be other examples in the PowerPoint. But take the time to watch that. Again, if you found this video, you've seen the link in the Blackboard site. Okay, last up here is this notion of spin. When you think of spin, it's a way to interpret data in a way that is favorable or unfavorable, depending on what you're trying to do with it. There's a good use of this. I mean, if you can use information in a positive frame that is honest, but it again makes people see the bright side, that's okay. I mean, that's something that you would want to do. So, for example, when I talk about attention getters with my public speaking courses, one of the examples I give is a shocking statistic. And the specific example is that 1 in 4 college students, you watching this right now, has an STD, whether they know it or not. 1 in 4. Now, that sounds awful, and it honestly is, right? That's a lot. But if I wanted to spin that information and make you think about it in a little more positive way, instead of saying 1 in 4 have an STD, I would say 3 out of 4 do not. I haven't lied to you. I haven't changed the facts or tweaked it and twisted it. I just reframed it from a negative position to a positive one. And that's what we really are talking about with appropriate spin. Now, bad spin is when you misrepresent truth. You might use extreme bias or propaganda. There are plenty of examples out there that we will see as we move through the semester. I can guarantee you will see most of the fallacies and inappropriate spin in the first presidential debate that we will watch next week. And so it will be apparent, I think, when you see it. But, if you want to go and just go with false information that seems to be right because it would follow some other information, you can't do that. So, this is a touchy subject, and I will simply say, be as honest as you possibly can and don't lie. And don't forget that there are 2 types of lies, right? There's lies of commission, where you actively say that something did or didn't happen that actually didn't or did happen. And then there are lies of omission, where you leave parts of something out, and that makes it seem either good or bad, when in reality it might have a completely different context. There were some issues with the dashboard site for Grand Valley's COVID reporting and the way that the data was being represented. And so it would tell you the number of, for example, active cases, and that's defined as cases reported in the last 10 days, but it didn't go into account for cases that may still be active because there was no retest available. How many people are pending right now? Like that stuff was sort of left out, and it made that number look small compared to what a more contextualized number may be. Right. So again, be as truthful and straightforward as you can. And if it still doesn't work, you're still not making a strong argument. Maybe you need to make a different argument. That's probably what should come next. Now there are some examples of good sources, bad sources that do this. We're not using sources, but if you are a consumer of news from a biased news source, and that's where your common knowledge is coming from, you might go to mediabiasfactcheck.com and enter that news source that you rely on, and it will tell you if it is left leaning, right leaning, way left, way right, pseudoscience, propaganda, or if it's somewhat down the middle. It's a very useful, non-partisan resource that I encourage you to check out. Okay, the last item here, make sure you know what you think you know. This is going back to what I was saying about the bias and the fact check here, but again, I don't want you to use sources, but if you want to verify your knowledge that you're about to espouse on a debate, you might want to go and check that. So, you think to yourself, wait a minute, let's talk about let's go with the monogamy is not realistic. And I think in there I talk about the divorce rate in America. Now that's just something that I think most of us know. It's right around half, a little more than half. And so I don't want to go and look up, what is the divorce rate so that I can give you like a 63% or a 59.2%. But I might want to make sure that I'm not, lying to you. So I might just search it. Divorce rate in America. And I would see, this doesn't make much sense in that term. Let's go down to CDC. 6.5 per 1,000. That's an interesting way to state that, isn't it? There's not a percentage. Let's try that. Percent of marriages that end in divorce. 50%. This is coming from APA.org, the American Psychiatric Association. So, about half would be the way to say that. And again, it's something that I assumed I knew, but I wanted to make sure I wasn't just lying to you. That's a different way to think about looking things up. That's a fact check versus a source search. Do you see the difference there? One is trying to collect information that can be used against the other side. The other is simply trying to verify what could be considered common knowledge just to make sure that you know what you think you know. And that is the name of the game on that last point. Okay, so that is chapter 8. That wraps things up for this week. Remember, the thing that you need to do for, in addition to this video, is go back and watch the PowerPoint that deals with fallacies. Fallacies will really negatively impact your debate credibility and your debate grade. So you'll want to know what those are so that you can avoid them. Also, as a final reminder, don't forget about what is due. So this is week 4. Your correspondence debate 1 is due this week. And again, that's on the Blackboard site under discussions. And you'll see the 3 threads, and you can pick any of those you want and respond. Go back to the syllabus and look at assignment 5 here, correspondence debate 1, and that will tell you what you need to do. As always, if you have questions, if anything's unclear, send me an email. I'll get back with you as soon as possible. And again, if there's something that I think would be beneficial for everyone to know based on one of those questions, I'll be happy to post an announcement and share it with the group. All right. Have a safe and happy week or weekend whenever you're watching this, and I will see you next time.